Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you this evening. Thanks for being here for this midweek Bible study period. We're starting a new study tonight, and we're going to spend the next several weeks talking about the miracles of Jesus. We're going to talk about a lot of the miracles that Jesus did and talk about the particulars of them and sort of the evidence that they supply. I think that's one of the things we'll be stressing, certainly, as we go through these studies, is that these miracles are there for the purpose of convincing us. They're one of the forms. They're not the only form, but the miracles of Jesus is one of the forms of confirmation that we have that Jesus Christ is indeed the only begotten Son of God. So we'll be talking about that as we go through this study. I thought it'd be very appropriate, though, to start our study of the miracles of Jesus by simply talking about the true definition of miracles, because people in the world in general misuse the term miracles, and when you do that, when you're sort of watering down this powerful evidence that the miracles provide. So the world would say, for instance, a new baby is born. A lot of us have had, a lot of you wives have had babies. A lot of us husbands have had the privilege of being in there when the baby was delivered and seeing that awesome thing happen. And tons of people would say, that's a miracle. It's a miracle. I'm telling you, that is a miracle. Childbirth is a miracle. What's wrong with that definition? What's wrong with applying the term miracle to something like childbirth? Tom?
It's a natural occurrence.
Okay.
Something that happens basically every day in almost every species of, animals, insects, that goes through some kind of birth occurrence. So it's a thing that God started from the very beginning.
Okay. You used an important word. You said it's a natural process. Anybody else want to add to that? Wayne?
It's completely consistent with the laws of nature.
That's right. It's a natural process. It complies with the laws of nature. It is an amazing, nobody would discount the fact that it is an amazing thing to witness a child be born. It's just off the chart. It's just off the chart. But as Tom said, it happens every day. It happens every moment. And we know exactly the mechanisms, the process that leads to childbirth. We know all about it. It's been studied for centuries. And everybody knows and understands the natural childbirth. Somebody we even refer to it as natural childbirth. So if that's not a miracle, then what would be a true definition of a miracle?
Something that can't be explained by science or natural events.
Okay. So a miracle is something supernatural. In other words, the laws of nature are suspended or overridden. Something happens that doesn't ordinarily happen. So Jesus walked on water. That's not natural. When you go out in the water, you sink down in the water. You don't walk on the top of the water. Jesus walking on the water was supernatural. We'll talk about that miracle in our study. Jesus raised Lazarus who'd been dead for 4 days. You don't do that. It doesn't happen. Somebody says, they bring people back whose heart has stopped beating, and so they're in an emergency situation at the hospital and a guy's heart stops. And, so they rush to his assistant and in a matter of just very short order, they're able to get his heart started beating again and he's brought back. That's not what we're talking about here. There would be natural processes at work there. But if somebody's been dead for 4 days, that's not natural that they could be alive again. We're going to talk tonight about Jesus turning water into wine. And that you can't do that. You can't just by a wave of the hand turn water into wine. That's not natural. That's not a natural process. It's supernatural. The laws of nature are suspended in order to make this happen. And so I think that's really important for us as we enter into a discussion of miracles to make sure that we really understand what we're talking about here. And I think it's important that we be able to persuade others that we have a chance to talk to. Because you hear people say things like, oh, miracles happen every day. You know, what do you mean there are no miracles in the world today? Miracles happen every day. Well, when they say that, they're using the term miracle in the flawed way that we just described versus the true way it's used in the Bible. Wade?
So when Jesus was doing miracles back here in the first century, when the apostles were doing miracles back in the first century, there was a reason for it. Obviously, Jesus was trying to do miracles to prove that he was the Son of God.
Yeah.
But if I came up to you and I said, hey, you know what? My sister had a baby yesterday. And they would have been like, oh, wow, Jesus is the Son of God. No. They'd have understood.
Natural things wouldn't convince anybody of anything.
But if Jesus is walking on water, or if he's restoring a man that had a withered hand and right in front of them, obviously that's something to convince them.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And that's a point that we want to keep stressing as we go through this study. The miracles were for a purpose. And the purpose, in the case of Jesus, the purpose of the miracles was to prove that he was the only begotten Son of God. Now, other people did miracles in Old Testament times and in New Testament times. Others besides Jesus did miracles. Those miracles had, the purpose of those miracles was for evidence and proof as well. But the miracles of Jesus were specifically for the proof that he was the Son of God. But again, you almost undoubtedly will hear people using the word miracle and applying it in inaccurate ways. And so I think we probably should be ready to say, yeah, well, childbirth's a wonderful thing, but it's not a miracle in the sense that the Bible uses the word miracle. Okay, all right. So we're going to talk about the very first miracle that Jesus did. So turn your Bibles to John chapter 2. We know this was the first miracle that he performed because John says so in this text. Let's take time to read it. It's just 11 verses. John chapter 2, verse 1. And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus said unto him, They have no wine. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. His mother said unto the servants, Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. And there were set there 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Jesus saith unto them, Fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. And he said unto them, Draw out now, and bear to the governor of the feast, and they bare it. And when the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants which drew the water knew, the governor of the feast called the bridegroom and said unto him, Every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. This beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. All right, so the question I ask is, in regards to chronological order, where does this miracle fit? Well, it fits at the very first of the miracles that Jesus performed. Verse 11, this was the beginning of miracles that Jesus did. And verse 11 also stresses the purpose that we were just describing. This beginning of miracles Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. So that kind of puts it all right together, right? What it was for and what it accomplished, this first miracle. I asked you, who might have been some of the others that were with Jesus on this occasion? Now, it mentions there in verse 2 that Jesus was called and his disciples. So Jesus, we don't know all of the disciples that Jesus might have accumulated by this point in time. But we do know that in the previous chapter, well, you can go all the way back to verse 35. the next day after, John stood and two of John's disciples, and looked upon Jesus as he walked. And John said, "Behold the Lamb of God." And the two disciples heard him speak, and they followed him. Then Jesus turned and saw them following, said unto them, "What seek ye?" They said to him, "Rabbi," which is to say, being interpreted, "Master, where dwellest thou?" He said unto them, "Come and see." They came and saw where he dwelt, and abode with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. One of the two which heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first findeth his own brother Simon, and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which is, being interpreted, the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. And Jesus beheld him and said, "Thou art Simon, the son of Jonah. Thou shalt be called Cephas," which is by interpretation a stone. So, we often talk about the fact we don't know a whole lot about the Apostle Andrew. I think the thing he's most remembered for is when he found Jesus, he went and got his brother and brought his brother. And then we don't take time to read the next, but the rest of that chapter, he finds Philip, and then Philip goes and finds, verse 45, Nathanael. And Nathanael is the apostle that we sometimes, we call him more often Bartholomew. So Peter, Andrew, Philip, and Bartholomew almost certainly were among the number who were with Jesus and observed this miracle that he performed. Now, the question could be asked, how is it that these were already his disciples if he had not yet performed any miracles to convince them that he was? Any thoughts on that, Tom?
Well, the two apostles, the disciples of John mentioned something to them about it.
So John said, "Behold the Lamb of God."
Yeah.
So the testimony of John.
And then you had others that were going out and, even at his birth, there were those that were looking for the Son of God. And evidently he then, after his baptism, he'd been out teaching, and people were following and seeing it. And some were piecing together the prophecies and different things together. And maybe not knowing exactly, but they were following because of that.
Okay, so there were things. So this sort of goes to the point we were saying earlier. There were other things that proved Jesus to be who he was, besides the miracles. And the miracles are just getting started here. But he's already accumulating disciples. And John, who was an inspired messenger from God, had already pointed him out. This is the Lamb of God. So there were some signs and indications already present. The idea of a teacher having disciples was not unique to Jesus. We talk about Jesus who had followers or disciples. Well, there were other teachers or rabbis who had followers as well. So, again, it would not have been necessarily, these disciples of Jesus were not necessarily fully aware of who they were following. They just, I think they were seeing it. They were seeing some hints at that. John's testimony certainly would have pointed them in that direction. And again, we don't know how many he already had by this point in time before he'd even worked his first miracle. Okay, so what was implied by Mary's statement? Verse 3, the mother of Jesus said unto him, "They have no wine." What is she just giving him information? Just so you can, just want you to be aware of that. They have no wine. It's a pretty bad deal. They've got a big party going on here. They got nothing to serve the guests. Is that it, Christy?
I think it. Can you do anything about it?
Yeah. She was calling on him to do something, wasn't she? She was basically saying, do something. Now, here's the question. How would Mary know that he could do something? Because I think, like Christy, that she clearly was wanting him to address the issue. And I don't think she was asking him to go out and find a source and buy a bunch of wine. I clearly think she was hinting at do something miraculous to solve this. Christy?
Even at the beginning, she kept these things in her heart when things
Yeah.
wise men came, things like that. Don't you think that
Yeah, because Mary, if there was anybody in the world who knew who Jesus was, it was Mary, right? She was not in doubt about him being the Son of God. And so, she would have had every reason to believe that he could miraculously address this. This would, I guess, if you try to put yourself in the position of those who were providing the feast, this would have been an embarrassing situation. We invited all these people, and now we don't have enough to serve the people who came, and so this would have been a somewhat embarrassing situation, I'm sure. And Mary, who, if there's anybody on planet Earth at that point in time who knew who Jesus was, Mary knew who Jesus was, and she's asking him to do something to supernaturally address this situation. What about the answer that Jesus gives back to her? Was that mean and disrespectful? He said, "Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come." I don't know. What about, how do you think about that? When I read that sounds pretty harsh. I got to tell you, that's he calls his mother woman. We in our culture, that's not very acceptable, right? If you guys ever say that to a woman, give me a glass of iced tea, you may get the glass of iced tea right on top of your head. That sounds pretty disrespectful. I can't believe that. I think this is a case of what we would refer to as something lost in translation here. That this Jesus is perfect, right? And he's supposed to honor your father and mother. That was one of the laws he lived under. He lived under the law of Moses, and the law of Moses said, honor your father and mother. He's not disrespecting his mother there. So I would think that we would say this is probably a case of, the translation just doesn't, it leaves, we don't get the tone of it. Any other thoughts on that? But notice he did say, my hour is not yet. And we're going to see that several times in our study. It almost seems certain that Jesus was sort of wanting to control the timing, the development of things in the course of his life and how people were reacting to him and what this would lead to. He knows where this is going, right? He knows what will ultimately happen. And so there does, to me, seem to be a strong sense in a number of different texts of Jesus trying to control the development of the timing of events. Tom?
Just the way that you instructed the children. There's sort of an inference that Mary was more than just a guest at the wedding. She evidently had someone in charge or something along that line, because the way it's worded, there's a wedding cake and the mother of Jesus was there, and then it talks about, and then Jesus and his disciples were invited. So he was there, she comes with, so if she was in charge, or doing something, or maybe it was a relative or something, and see things, and we don't have wine. But there's evidence going through that she knows who he is. At his birth, he had the angel appeared to her.
Well, she knew she was a virgin. She gave birth to a child. She knew this.
They had the journey to Egypt. They came back. They saw that they were delivered from Pharaoh. They went up there. They journeyed when he was 12 down to Jerusalem, and he told her, I'm about my father's business.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's true. Mary knew. There wouldn't have been any doubt Mary might know who he was.
And, evidently, there's a lot of things that we don't have on his growing up and, the interaction on a daily basis of what he did. But there were things that evidently she knew that he had ability.
For sure. She's not in doubt at all. Wade?
So, we focus here on verse 4. Why are you saying this? This is not my time, right? But if you look at verse 5, apparently Mary didn't feel, if you're reading verse 4, it looks like he's blowing her off, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at verse 5, it didn't seem that way to Mary, because Mary said, looked to the servant and said, do whatever he tells you to do.
That's right. She didn't take that as a no.
No, she didn't take it as a no.
Yeah.
So she kind of knew what he was doing,
Yeah.
and she instructed the servants to do whatever he told them.
Yeah. I think that's right. That's right. So again, I would just argue that verse 4, don't get too turned off by the way that's translated, that response, because I don't think it was disrespectful. I think we probably missed something in the translation. And as Wade said, his mother did not act like his response was a complete, you used the expression blowing him off and blowing her off, and I don't think she took it that way. Eric?
I was going to say, when he calls her a woman, like you were talking about, when he's on the cross, he calls her the same, in John
Good point.
19:26.
Woman, behold thy son.
Yeah, woman, behold your son.
That's a good tie-in there, because that was obviously an expression of endearment there. I mean, he's expressing his love and concern for her there, and he refers to her as woman. Good tie-in there. Wayne?
That's the same thing I was going to say.
Yeah, okay. All right, good point. I hadn't even thought about that, but I think that's excellent. Yeah.
But also, what he's instructing the servants to do whatever he wants them to do, wouldn't that also kind of point to the fact that she's probably not just a guest?
She probably what?
She's probably not just a guest at the wedding.
Oh, you think that she may have had some capacity, serving capacity or something?
Or she's telling the servants to listen to him. Is that maybe also pointing to that?
She's given instructions to the servants. And okay, that might be. I had never really thought of that before, but that might be that she was. Verse 1 just says she was there. Verse 5, she's speaking to the servants, giving instructions to the servants. So that might imply that she had some official capacity there, possibly, maybe. All right. Now here's something interesting. How many water pots were they? How large were they? Well, there were 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. So, the Jews were all about ceremonial washings, right? Cindy and I were talking about this earlier. Cindy was pretty blown away by the fact that there would be water pots this large, available at easy access. But when you stop thinking about the Jews were all about these ceremonial washings. You've got to wash your hands before you eat. You got to do all the washings that they expected people to do. So this probably was not an unusual thing that these water pots would be there. They were 2 or 3 firkins apiece. So I had a little note on the firkin here. You probably already have looked that up too. Let's see. A firkin is 8.6696 gallons. So 8.5 gallons. If they were 2 firkins apiece, so that would be like 17 gallons of. But that's on the low end, So if they were 2 firkins, and a firkin is a little over 8.5 gallons. Then we're talking about 17 gallons per, and there were 6 of them. So if you try to sort of make a rough estimate, let's say that they were not 2 firkins, they were something between 2 and 3 firkins apiece. So one of them is probably got to be around 20 gallons. You got 6 of them. You got 120 gallons of water there. I mean, it's on the order of 120 gallons of water.
The definition I found.
Do what?
The definition I found was kind of strange. It said that it was a Hebrew bath, a mount for a Hebrew bath.
Okay. So big enough that you could get in and bathe. I guess you could in a 20-gallon. If you had a 20-gallon stock tank, you could probably get in there and wash off pretty good. But I don't know that they physically got their whole bodies in there, but they would use them for these washings that they did. The question that Cindy had is how did they carry them? I don't know that they carried them. They filled them with water, which doesn't mean that they took them to the river or whatever. Very likely they carried it'd be like we'd say carry buckets of water and fill these things up. They probably didn't move the big water pots per se. But that's a lot, because I mean if it's a 20-gallon thing and water weighs about 8 pounds per gallon, so just one of those would be 160 pounds. It'd be hard to carry. Wait.
We have these 40-pound or 40-gallon troughs that we feed our animals in. You fill those things up with water, you can't move this.
You can't even tip it over.
No.
I've tried before.
Yeah. I mean, that would be, well, if it's 30, it'd be 10 gallons less than that.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to move.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of water. So we're talking about probably at a minimum 120 gallons. So here's a follow-up question, a couple follow-up questions that I think are really important. How could the witnesses be sure that the water pots initially contained only water? How could they be sure? They're the one who filled it, right? It wasn't like, sleight of hand. Somebody, Jesus has got a front man here, and he's working sort of, sleight of hand to get wine into these buckets that are actually filling the water pot. No, they knew it was water because they filled them with water. And then how could they be sure that the samples carried to the governor of the feast came from those same water pots? Well, because they drew them out, right? So it says, verse 7, Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water. They filled them up. He said to them, he didn't do it. He didn't have any contact with any of this. He said to them, draw out now and bear to the governor of the feast, and they bear it. So, I'm just emphasizing that for this point. These miracles that we'll be talking about with Jesus are verifiable. I mean, you could verify what has happened here. We had water, and now it's wine. We had water, and it's just changed to wine. And the reason I make that point is, if you pay any attention today to supposed miracle workers who are not miracle workers, they can't work miracles, but they pretend to work miracles. They do things that are not verifiable. I've told you before, through the years, I've taken time to go to some Pentecostal faith healing rallies, and it's so interesting. But the miracles are, I got bad headaches, and he healed me of my bad headaches. Well, bad headaches are a real thing, but I can't see one. I can't see one when you got it, and I can't see one when it's gone. Or they'll heal somebody of hearing loss. I can't see hearing loss, and I can't see it if it's supposedly gone. It's not verifiable, and so that's one of the unique differences between the false claims of these people today versus the real miracles that Jesus and others in the Bible performed. There was an easy capacity to verify what was actually happening, right? So that's important. So they knew that it was just water when they started. They knew it was, when they took it out and carried it to the governor of the feast, they knew where it came from. They came out of those water pots. Okay, so verse 10, the governor's reaction. Every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse, but thou hast kept the good wine until now. So that's how he responded. Now that's the verse that we really got to deal with, because, unfortunately, we've got people who want to try to use this episode to justify social drinking. There are people who want to say, it always comes up. If we ever get in a discussion with people about drinking alcohol, they say, well, Jesus made wine at the wedding feast. They always, that's one of the first go-tos is to use that argument. And verse 10 is the critical verse in regards to that. Now, one of the things that I think we all already know is that the word oinos, the Greek word oinos, is just a word that means product of the grape, basically. It is, and we won't take time to do this right now. We've done it before. But you can go to various Bible verses where in one place it obviously was intoxicated and somebody could get drunk on it. In other places it was not. It was just what we refer to as grape juice. That in the Greek there was, we talk about grape juice and wine. When we say wine, we mean it has alcoholic content. Always, without exception. If I told you, go buy some wine, you would know I'm telling you, go to the package store and buy some alcoholic drink, right? That was not the case in these times. The Greek word oinos, O-I-N-O-S, if you're spelling it with English letters, oinos was just the product of the grape, the juice of the grape, and it could be fermented and therefore contain alcoholic content, and people could get drunk on that kind of wine, or it could be just the juice of the grape, just what we call grape juice. And the only way to distinguish that is let the context speak to it. It's the only way. There's no other way to do that. So, so when the governor of the feast tastes this wine, he says to the bridegroom, buddy, this doesn't make sense, because you always serve your best first, and then if you have to, you go to something inferior. Now, people are quick to try to conclude that is a reference to the alcoholic content of this wine that was made. That doesn't even make sense. Just from a common sense point of view, it doesn't make sense. I don't know, a couple ways to approach this. One way is if you let's say I invite a couple of you over to my house. We're going to grill steaks. Right? So we got steaks on the grill, but just about the time the steaks are done cooking, a few more people show up. We have to break out the hamburgers, and so we grill up some hamburgers in addition to the steaks that are. And then before we know it, some more people show up. We may have to revert to hot dogs. We started with the good stuff, the steaks. We ended up with hot dogs. That's what you do. You serve your best first. That's what the governor of the feast is saying. It's just typical to serve your best first. You have kept the best until last. Well, that's just a reference to quality here. It's not. Why would it be a reference to alcoholic content? I mean, that wouldn't prove it. It's more intoxicating. You've kept the good stuff. We can really get drunk on this stuff. This is way better to get drunk on than the stuff you gave us at the start. No. Fact of the matter is, so the expression, the verb there is well drunk. When men have well drunk, then that which is worse. That word in the Greek can refer to intoxication, inebriation, but it can also refer to simply satiation, if I can say that. They're satiated. They've had enough. They have well drunk. That's sort of like we sit down at a good meal and the hostess brings around seconds and, I can need another bite. I'm just stuffed. Well, you're satiated. You can't drink. You can't eat anymore. You're full. And that's what he says here. Typically, what you would do in this business is you'd serve your best wine or grape juice first, because we know that was common. They commonly drank unfermented wine in the first century, although people today deny that. The historical proof is abundant that it was very common for them to have unfermented grape juice. And they had a variety of ways to make that possible. They could preserve grape juice in such fashion that they could keep it from fermenting, and that was the common drink. That's what they were drinking at this feast. And so they had served some. What Jesus provided was better grape juice, better tasting. Think about it this way: if the guests at the wedding feast were already drunk, how would they even have the capacity to tell that this is better than what we've been drinking? They're well drunk. They're really almost passed out drunk. And now we're expecting them to be wine connoisseurs? We're expecting them to be able to tell the difference between good and bad wine, and they've already drank so much they're just about out of it? That doesn't make sense, does it? Wait.
I used to know a guy that he drank beer, and he didn't like the taste of beer. And he told me, he said, I don't like beer. He said, but I know I can drink one or two beer, and then I'll taste the rest of it. I just keep drinking.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to your point,
Yeah.
I mean, your taste buds kind of go away after you become...
But that's true of anything. So if Leanne serves you a piece of cherry pie, and then you say, I want another piece. you don't taste the second piece as well as you tasted the first piece because your taste buds, as you say, have become accustomed to it. I think that's a good observation. JD?
Yeah, even a lot of people who will go to this and try to, justify drinking. I mean, those same people usually also point out some passages that they would agree that would say, well, you can drink, but you can't get drunk. And so you have the point here that the people were well drunk. So if that means they were highly intoxicated, then you have another avenue to point out, clearly this can't be alcohol related, because if you're talking to this person who has that belief, you would agree, person, that Jesus would be involved in sinning if he's providing more alcohol to people who are not just drinking, but they're drinking to excess to the point of being drunk. So,
exactly right. And that's the argument. I think JD is exactly right. And that's the argument we've got to add into this mix. So remember, we're saying that Jesus produced probably at a minimum 120 gallons of wine. If that's intoxicating wine, not just grape juice, but intoxicating wine, then Jesus is producing 120 gallons of wine to people who are already intoxicated. Now, how does that match up with the moral character of Jesus? And of course the verse, and you might have this written in your margin, or maybe you want to, Habakkuk 2:15. Habakkuk 2:15, woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttest thy bottle to him, that maketh him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. So Habakkuk 2:15 states a woe to someone who would give intoxicating drink to his neighbor and make him drunk. Jesus, these people are already drunk. You want me to believe that Jesus, who did no sin, that there would be a sin, but Jesus did no sin. You want me to believe that Jesus would give 120 gallons? We don't know how many people were there. How many people you think that we have no way of knowing? Maybe the whole village of Cana was invited to this feast. It's a possibility, I suppose. But if you had, if you had 500 people there, you're still talking about a fourth or a half a gallon each that he's given to everybody to drink more, and they're already drunk. Wayne?
Just to add to the point that you began with, the purpose of his miracles was to show himself to be the Son of God. So the very first miracle that proves Jesus is the Son of God, Jesus provides 120 gallons of alcohol to people who are already well drunk.
Yeah.
To prove he is the Son of God.
It's so illogical, isn't it? I mean, just on the very face of it, it's illogical. And I do think that Habakkuk 2:15, you put that in the mix, and it just couldn't be. Amy.
If I remember correctly, in verse 13 it talks about the Passover of the Jews, which was in the first month. The harvest would have been like July to October for grapes. So if you think about it, they didn't have refrigeration, they didn't have canning to preserve. So I know like right now, oranges are in season. They just taste so much better than the ones we get, in the summertime when they're not fresh.
Yeah.
And so this would not have been a time for them to have fresh.
Great, fresh. So probably what they had been serving had been preserved in there were multiple ways that the Jews preserved grape juice to keep it from fermenting, but all of those ways would have diminished the taste quality, right? For instance, one of the ways they would do it would be to dehydrate it. They would dry the grapes, and then they would store them. And then when they wanted to make some grape juice, they would rehydrate them. Okay, that's grape juice, but it doesn't taste as good as it did when it first came off the vine. That's a good point. And so they're taking this grape juice that probably has been preserved for several months, and it doesn't taste as good. And Jesus has made something like the best you ever tasted. There was a big contrast. It was taste. It wasn't alcoholic content. It was taste. Tom?
That was like this, but you just didn't tell them, okay, go serve it. He told them, take it to the New American, so the head waiter, the one that was in charge, the one that, sampled everything before it went out to the guests. And so it went directly from can't, there, that when it turned the wine, whether it was once they filled it to the brim or when they dipped it later in, Jesus doesn't tell them. He just says, dip, take, and go. Here these guys carry this, how they carry it, we don't even know. He carried a ladle, he carried a glass, or, whatever he did, but whatever they did, they took and they served it, and took it to the head waiter. He validated that this is what it was, and he didn't go back, he didn't question where, he didn't know where it went, but he went right to the bridegroom and asked the bridegroom, well, why did you wait?
Yeah.
Then you go back to Jesus.
Yeah.
We don't see a whole lot of other interaction with Jesus. It's like he came on the scene, he did what he did, and left.
Okay. All right, JD?
Yeah, I mean, this is another example of the importance of context and looking at what makes sense and doesn't, as you were pointing out. But, the word oinos, if you do a word study throughout the Bible, it can be used in lots of different fashions, like we were alluding to. It was used when it talked about the grape still being on the vine, it being, freshly squeezed, and in some cases it being fermented. But again, the same thing like if you look in, about worship, if you look at the word solo, it can mean something different. Same thing with, the way, at least in English, people use the word baptism. Well, even in the Bible, it's different things depending on what the context is. But the point is the context and all the things that we've been talking about force upon us the conclusion that it's non-alcoholic.
Yeah, I think exactly. As Wayne,
Dictionary and say, oh, look right there, it's somewhere in the Bible that word means alcohol.
and we don't deny that, by the way.
Right. We don't. It's
That's
the
right.
context.
We don't deny that. Again, as Wayne was pointing out, the purpose of this miracle, verse 11, this beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee and manifested forth his glory. And so this was to manifest his glory. To make drunk men drunker? That doesn't make sense. And then maybe another real good verse to tie in here, Luke 17, 1 and 2. Jesus himself said, it is impossible but that offenses will come, but woe unto him through whom they come. It were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he cast into the sea than that he should offend one of these little ones. Jesus said, you don't cause an offense. You don't put a stumbling block in front of others. And he would have in this instance if he gave this much intoxicating wine to people who were already drunk. So, of course, we're out of time, but the result of the miracle, first miracle Jesus worked, the result of the miracle was, and verse 11, and his disciples believed on him. Right? So, again, miracles in the Bible always had a purpose. The miracles that Jesus did always had a purpose. We're going to read about him. We're going to study about him healing a lot of sick people. Those miracles, the people who were healed received an immediate blessing, but that wasn't the real purpose. Jesus didn't heal the whole world. He healed a lot of people, but he didn't heal the whole world. The miracles of healing were not just for healing. They were for proof. And this was for proof, and all the miracles that we'll study had that purpose in mind. All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate the good discussion. And I do think I think it's an obvious starting place. The first miracle that Jesus did is we're talking about the miracles of Jesus. But that's one that comes up a lot. That's probably one of the better known miracles of Jesus. And unfortunately, it is misused pretty badly. And hopefully we can be ready to answer those who would try to misuse it. Thanks, everybody.